everyone. Myself, Dr. Prashant Thakur. Welcome you all on behalf of Gujarat Government Physiotherapy Association to this series of evidence-based webinars where we actually discuss the practical and theoretical aspects of various diseases and treatment opportunities. Today we have with us Dr. Karishma Jhagar, who had completed her MPT in neurology in the year of 2007, and afterwards she has been working at various prestigious institutes of Gujarat, like as a lecturer at SPB College of Physiotherapy, as a senior lecturer and in-charge principal at Sri Kekashe Physiotherapy College, and currently working as a senior lecturer at Government Physiotherapy College, Jamnagar. In the past 12 years of academic experience, she has seen a lot of patients with facial low palsy and Bell's palsy. So today we are going to request her to enlighten us about the Bell's palsy. The topic is Bell's palsy, evidence-based assessment and physiotherapy treatment. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Prashant. Thank you very much for this opportunity to interact with such a wide audience. And I must add that the entire team of GGP is doing very commendable work for the upliftment of the profession. So please keep it up. And before wasting much time, let us start with the topic. So the topic of discussion today is Bell's palsy, evidence on assessment and physiotherapy management. And this topic we are going to discuss under the following headings. So first we are going to discuss about the basic information regarding the Bell's palsy, and especially for the students who are watching this webinar, I want to clear out few confusions that I find many students, they are confused about what is UMN, what is LMN, what is the difference between facial palsy and Bell's palsy. So for them, we will just brush up with the basic information. Then we will move on to the assessment part, where we will look into few outcome measures that can be used for clinical practice and for the research purposes. And then we will move on to the evidence-based management. Then we'll move on to the evidence-based management, where we will discuss a few physiotherapy modalities and what is the level of evidence that we have for using them. Okay, so let us first start with what is facial palsy. Now, many students I find they use this term facial palsy interchangeably with the Bell's palsy. So they find it very confusing. So facial palsy is not a synonym of Bell's palsy. Facial palsy encompasses all the lesions of facial nerve. Okay, and the lesions of facial nerve are broadly classified into two main categories. One is UMN facial palsy and the other is LMN facial palsy. And so the lesion of nucleus and the peripheral, the cranial nerve is called LMN palsy, and any lesion which is above the nucleus of cranial nerve is considered to be UMN. So UMN facial palsy is also called supranuclear palsy, above the nucleus, so supranuclear, and it is also called central facial palsy. LMN facial palsy is also called nuclear or intranuclear, and it is also called, in some research articles especially, you will find the term peripheral facial palsy. Peripheral facial palsy is nothing but LMN facial palsy. Okay. Now, what is supranuclear facial palsy? It affects the contralateral lower half of the face. So if you divide the face into 4 quadrants, then UMN facial palsy affects the opposite side lower half. Means if there is lesion on the left side of brain, then the right lower part of the face will be paralyzed. Okay. Emotional expressions are intact, because emotional expressions are conveyed to facial nucleus via a very complex neural pathway that includes limbic system, the paracingulate gyrus, and the frontal lobe. So that pathway is different from the pathway of voluntary facial movements. Okay, so voluntary facial movements, they originate from the motor cortex, and emotional expression, they originate from limbic system. So it is a different pathway, and that is why emotional expressions are intact. in association with limb weakness or other cranial nerve lesion. Now, UMN facial palsy, almost always there is associated limb weakness, upper limb or lower limb weakness will be there, or there is other cranial nerve lesion. Very rarely it can be isolated. Okay, otherwise it is almost always associated with limb and other cranial nerve weakness. Now, element facial palsy. So, element facial palsy affects same side, on the same side ipsilaterally, and it affects both upper and lower part of the face. So, entire half of the face is equally affected. And this element facial palsy is more common than UMN facial palsy. So, approximately 60 to 70% of all facial palsy are element facial palsy. Okay, why? Because the facial palsy, the facial nerve, it originates from the pontomedullary junction, and from there it traverses a very complex tortuous course through the temporal bone, facial canal, and finally emerges from the stylomastoid foramis. That tortuous long course is susceptible for many kind of etiologies, and because of that, element facial palsy is more commoner than UMN facial palsy. In this case, in element facial palsy, both voluntary and emotional movements are affected, okay, because it is a final pathway which is affected. So both voluntary and emotional movements will be affected. Okay, now coming to the causes of infranuclear or element type of facial palsy, because our focus of discussion today is on element palsy, and especially the Bell's palsy. Okay, why I have highlighted Bell's palsy is because among all the different causes of unilateral element type of facial palsy, approximately 75% are due to Bell's palsy. So it is that common. Okay, 75% of all the unilateral facial palsy is Bell's palsy. So it is very common, and these are the other causes that can also result in in element facial palsy. So now let us transfer our focus to Bell's palsy. What is Bell's palsy? It is an idiopathic acute paralysis of face related to inflammation and swelling of facial nerve within the facial canal or stylomastoid foramen. Okay, so I have highlighted few words here that it is idiopathic, it is acute, and it is related to inflammation. And these highlighted words can help you in differentiating this Bell's palsy from the other causes of element facial palsy. Okay, so Bell's palsy is most of the time it is idiopathic meaning of unknown cause. You cannot just pinpoint to a one particular cause for the development of paralysis. Okay, now they have identified that the herpes simplex virus is associated with many cases of Bell's palsy, but majority of times cause cannot be found, so it is idiopathic. It is acute, it develops rapidly. So a person who goes to bed with normal face may wake up next morning with a face that is paralyzed, okay, on the affected side. So it is acute, it rapidly develops, and it is related to inflammation. So there is some kind of inflammation either in the facial canal or stylomastoid foramen, and which causes the compression of facial nerve, and that results into the paralysis. What are the signs and symptoms? So like I said, the entire half of the face is affected, and in this case, the left side of face of this person is affected. So there will be a creaseless forehead at rest. At rest, you will see that the flattened nasolabial fold, the nasolabial fold will be flattened on the affected side. On movement, you will see that the patient has incomplete eye closure, or when he shows his teeth or snarl, the mouth is deviated to the normal side. So that is asymmetrical mouth opening. Along with that, there are some other associated symptoms, like there is altered taste sensations, especially from the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Okay, so if you are licking the ice cream, that means you are stimulating the facial nerve. Okay, so there is altered taste sensation. Some patients may also complain of post-auricular pain, that is pain behind the ear, and hyperacusis, that is they hear loud voice on the affected side. And so these are some associated symptoms. The medical management is clear. The first line of management is corticosteroids and antiviral medication, and these work best when they are started within first few hours of the onset. First 72 hours of onset, if corticosteroids are started, it can improve the prognosis dramatically. Okay? So corticosteroids are used to reduce the inflammation. If we talk about the activity limitation in case of Bell's palsy, then the patients will have difficulty in drinking water because the water will seep out from one side of the mouth. These patients will have trouble in speaking or pronunciating certain labial consonants. They will have problem. The eye does not close properly, so there may be dryness in the eyes. And more often or most of the time, the most important impairment is that psychosocial impairment. Okay, because face is not just an organ of communication or an organ of special sense. It is the identity of the person. So imagine I had a patient of a 15-year-old girl, young girl, whose chief complaint was, of course, with a facial palsy, but her chief complaint was that she's not able to make a pout or to take a selfie. So that's why she was isolating herself, not going to school, not going out to play. So there is a major psychological impairment in case of facial palsy, and especially Bell's palsy. So this was about the basic information about the facial palsy and Bell's palsy. So now we move on to the assessment part. So in assessment part, we will be looking at this 4 outcome measure: House-Brakeman facial nerve grading system, Sunnybrook facial grading system, facial disability index, and E-face assessment system. Okay. Now this House-Brakeman, Sunnybrook, and E-face, these 3 assessment systems, the domain of assessment for these 3 is functional impairment. They are used to assess the functional impairment in case of Bell's palsy. Facial disability index is used to assess the activity limitation and the participation restriction in case of facial nerve palsy. So the domain is activity limitation and participation restriction. Okay. So let us move on to House-Brakeman facial nerve grading system. Now this is probably one of the oldest grading system or outcome measure. It was designed in 1985. Okay. So it is most commonly used tool for clinical evaluation. It evaluates functional impairment, and it divides the impairment into grades. So grade 1 to grade 6. Okay, grade 1 is normal and grade 6 is complete impairment or severe impairment. So, and it can be used for facial palsy irrespective of causes. So you can use the scale for Bell's palsy, or you can use this for post-traumatic low motor neuron facial palsy or post-surgical facial palsy. So irrespective of the cause of facial palsy, the scale can be used. So let us see what the scale is about. Now, like I said, it divides the functional impairment into 6 grades. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and the 6 is okay, 6 grades. So now 1, as I said, is normal, and 6 is complete paralysis or severe impairment. Okay, and 2 to 5 is incomplete paralysis or moderate affection. Right? So this is incomplete paralysis. Now surgeons also use this grading system to decide whether the patient is a candidate for surgery or not. If it is normal, then there is of course no need for surgery. If it is grade 6, means the facial nerve is there is complete lesion in the facial nerve. There is no conduction in the facial nerve. So there they may consider a surgery in case of traumatic facial nerve palsy, of course. And this 3, 2 to 5, it is incomplete impairment. So there is some continuity in the facial nerve is still there. It suggests that there is some continuity still, or some conduction is still there. Okay, so the prognosis is good. Now if you see the description, so normal facial function, and the grade 2 says there is a gross slight weakness noticeable on close inspection and may have very slight synkinesis. At rest, normal symmetry and tone. And on motion, forehead, moderate to good function. Eye, complete closure with minimum effort. Okay, so you can see that 3 parameters are assessed. One is gross movement. Okay, so the gross movement is attempted on the affected side of face. The second parameter is that you observe the patient's face when it is at rest, so whether there is symmetry or not. And third is that you tell the patient to isolate the movement of forehead, that is creasing the forehead, and eye, that is closing the eye. Okay, and mouth, that is showing the teeth or smile, and look for the asymmetry. So these parameters are assessed. Now, if you look at the scale, sometimes you may find it difficult to place the patient in one of the particular category, okay, because it is all descriptive, and it depends on the perception of the assessor. So, if the therapist is assessing, it depends on his perception whether he finds this a severe impairment or severe symmetry or a moderate asymmetry. Okay, so it is very subjective and very descriptive, and that is why it is difficult sometimes to place a patient in one particular category. So to overcome this limitation, what they did is they decided to make the scale objective. How did they do this? So they suggested that you should observe for the eyebrow raising. Okay, so elevation of the eyebrow or wrinkling of the forehead. And the other movement to be observed is smiling, or the lateral displacement, outward displacement of the angle of mouth. So these two movements have to be observed. And how it is to be scored? So here you can see that they have taken a 1 centimeter. This is 1 centimeter scale, and that 1 centimeter scale is divided into 4 parts. So each part is 0.25 mm. Okay, so this each 0.25 mm is given one point. Okay, so total is 1, 2, 3, 4 points. So 4 points for the lateral movement of the angle of mouth, and 4 points similarly for the upward elevation of the eyebrow. So now you have to measure the lateral movement of the mouth and the upward elevation from the eyebrow, and you have to give score depending upon the movement. So if the eyebrow moves just 0.25 mm, then the score is 1. If it moves 0.5 mm, then the score is 2. Okay, similarly for mouth. So the total score, that maximum score that can be given is 8. 4 for mouth and 4 for eyebrow raising. Okay, so maximum score is 8. So you have to grade out of 8. Now, this score out of 8 can be converted into the impairment grading. So if the score is 8 out of 8, then it is normal, and you can assign the impairment grading of 1. If the score is 7 out of 8, you can say that it is grade 2. If the score is 5 to 6, then it can be assigned to category 3. Okay, so similarly, that score can be converted into the descriptive category. And based on the category, they have also given an estimated function. So 6 is that is 0% function, 1 is 100% function, and in between there is the category given for the function. Okay, so that subjective scale was now converted to an objective one. So what are the limitations? Well, the limitation is that it does not provide detailed information about the specific dysfunction in face. So which part of the face is more affected or less affected, whether it is the upper part is more affected, lower part is more affected. So we do not get the information about specific areas of face. There is no specific evaluation of synkinesis. Okay, so what is the grading for synkinesis? That is not given. It is not sensitive enough to detect small changes. So with the therapy, if there are small improvements, then you cannot, that small improvements may not convert into entirely a different grade. Okay? So it is not sensitive enough to detect the small changes. Now there is high intra-rater reliability. So this scale has been tested, and for the same person assessing it repeatedly, there is a good reliability. But if two different persons assessing the same patient, then the reliability is very low, and very wide variation have been found in the categories that has been assigned by two different raters. Okay, so it has a low intra-rater reliability. Now, all this limitation, keeping in mind all this limitation, and another scale was developed so that this limitation could be overcome. And that scale is Sunnybrook Facial Grading System. This was developed in 1996. Okay, so almost 11 years after the housebreaking. So this was designed by Sunnybrook Health Science Center in Toronto in 1996. And this is used for clinical evaluation of facial nerve function. The domain for evaluation is functional impairment. Can be used for facial palsy irrespective of causes, and this scale has good inter-rater and intra-rater reliability. Okay, this has a good reliability. So here is the Sunnybrook facial grading system. Now it assesses the facial function in 3 parameters. So first look for the resting symmetry of the face, then look for the excursion of voluntary movement, and then look for the synkinesis during this voluntary movement. So when you are asking the patient to do voluntary movements, simultaneously look for the degree of synkinesis. Okay? So 3 parameters are assessed, and this excursion of voluntary movement is assessed in 5 standard expressions. Okay, so forehead wrinkle, gentle eye closure, opening of mouth or smile, showing the teeth or snarl, and puckering the lip. So these 5 standard expressions are assessed for mouth excursion, and you can see that there is very clear description for each of the grade. Okay, and here also resting symmetry also you can see that there is very clear description given for each grade. You do the total and you get the resting symmetry score. Here also you do the total, you get the voluntary movement score. Here you get the synkinesis score, and that all can be converted into a composite score. So it makes this system, this grading system, objective and fit for use in the research purposes. Okay, so all the, like I said, all the limitations for House-Brackmann facial nerve grading system has been overcome by Sunnybrook facial grading system, and this is the most widely used scale in case of research purposes. Okay, so now let us move to the another system which is comparatively new. It has only been designed recently in 2015. So E-phase assessment system. It is an electronic clinician graded facial function scale. It is a software system. Okay, so there is a software which is named the E-phase. So that software is designed, and in that software you can record the video, you can pause the video to look for the particular movement. Okay, and then the clinician can grade the resting symmetry, the voluntary movement, and the synkinesis. So it measures static position, that is resting symmetry, dynamic movement, and the synkinesis pattern. And the scores are given from 0 to 100. So 0 means maximum impairment and 100 means normal. Okay. So it can also analyze facial expression during spontaneous conversation and note the amount of symmetry, movement, and synkinesis when the patient emotes. It has a very good intra-rater and intra-rater reliability, and that has been established. There are also tutorials available for training in E-phase assessment system. The only limitation and drawback you can say is that it is a comparatively newer assessment system, and it has not been used in research purposes till now. Okay, so we do not know how effective it is for research purposes. It is still under study, and they are still refining the grades. Okay, so how does it grade? So this is a basic graph. They convert the score into this graph so that it also gives visual feedback to the patient. So you can see here, this is a static score. Okay, so static score is given for resting eyebrow position, resting palpebral fissure position, then nasolabial fold orientation at rest, nasolabial fold depth at rest, and oral commissure, the shape of oral commissure at rest, and it is graded from 0 to 100. Okay? So 0 means complete asymmetry and 100 means normal. Okay, so higher the score, better is the function. Here it is a dynamic score or voluntary score on voluntary excursion. Again, it is brow elevation, gentle eye closure, full eye closure, nasolabial fold depth with smile, nasolabial orientation with smile, oral commissure movement with smile, lower lip movement with E, or saying E, or showing teeth. Here also 0 means no movement, 100 means normal movement. And synkinesis score. Okay. So synkinesis score, 100 means there is no synkinesis, there is complete symmetry, and 0 means there is total asymmetry. Okay. So more the score, the better the function. So this was about the E-phase. It has a high inter-rater and intra-rater reliability, but it is comparatively new, and it is currently available. The software is available as an application, and currently only the iOS version is available, and that too is paid. So that you can, if you consider it to be the only limitation. And another benefit of using this E-phase is that you can get serial graphs. Okay. So if you take the serial graphs of the patient on different date, you can look at the improvements. So that is another benefit. Now coming to our last outcome measure, that is facial disability index. The domain of assessment is activity limitation and participation restriction. So, and it is a self-reporting tool. That is, you have to just give the sheet to the patient and patient will fill it on his own. So, it is a self-reporting tool for assessment of physical disability and psychosocial factors related to facial nerve injury. Produces reliable measurement with good construct validity. It is higher the score, lesser the disability, and has been translated and adapted into many European languages like Italian and German. So this facial disability index assesses two domains. One is physical function and other is social and well-being function. Physical function has also has 5 questions, and social and well-being also has 5 questions to be graded. Okay. Physical function has 6 grades from 0 to 5 for each question, and social and well-being questions also have 6 grades, but here it is 1 to 6. Okay, and then the total for physical function, total score out minus question answered upon question answered into 100 by 4. So you get a percentage function, and then you get a percentage of social well-being and function. Okay, so the score is converted into percentage. So that makes it objective. So this scale is also widely used in research purposes, and it tells you about the quality of life or the participation restriction that patient is facing because of facial palsy. So that was about the assessment. We discussed House-Brakeman's facial nerve grading system, Sunnybrook facial grading system, the E-phase assessment system, and the facial disability index. So now coming to the evidence on treatment. So do we need physiotherapy? What is the need of physiotherapy in case of Bell's palsy? So there was a very good RCT done, which was published in 2013. It was published in 2013, but the duration of the study was from 2007 to 2011. Okay, so 4 years they did the study, and on 87 patients with acute Bell's palsy. The purpose or objective of the study was to find out that is there any difference in the recovery of facial nerve if the physiotherapy is started earlier. Okay, so if you give physiotherapy earlier, of course, along with the medication, if you start physiotherapy earlier, is there any difference in facial nerve recovery? And what they found out is, so what was there? They had divided into 2 groups. The patients were divided into 2 groups. One was given physiotherapy along with medication, and the other group was on medication alone. So what they concluded is that the physical therapy appears to be effective only in more severe Bell's palsy. That is House-Brakeman grade 5 and 6. Whereas less severe Bell's palsy or House-Brakeman grade 4 and below, they result in complete spontaneous recovery regardless of physiotherapy. So what does this mean? That if there is very mild or very moderate impairment in Bell's palsy, it is likely that it will spontaneously recover. But in case of severe Bell's palsy, that is Housemarque grade 5 and 6, physiotherapy is effective in preventing the complication, preventing the synkinesis, and effective in facial nerve recovery, earlier recovery. Okay, so it is effective in severe Bell's palsy, but mild to moderate they can recover on their own without physiotherapy. So in treatment modalities, we are going to discuss treatment modalities: neuromuscular retraining, EMG and mirror biofeedback, electrical stimulation, PNF, and mind therapy. Okay. So let us start with neuromuscular retraining or neuromuscular re-education. What is this? It is a process to facilitate the return of desired facial movement patterns and elimination of unwanted movements and expression patterns. That means that the patient is asked to do small movements for a very low repetition count, and the patient is made aware of not moving the unwanted facial movement. That is, the non-affected or normal side should not move. If the patient is working on his eyebrow elevation, then only the eyebrow on the affected side should move, and the other parts of the face should remain at rest. So the entire focus of the patient is to produce symmetrical movement. Okay, the repetition count is kept too low, so that the patient does not fatigue, and the patient is asked to focus on producing the desired facial movements. It is based on patient education and use of extrinsic feedback to achieve re-education. Now, extrinsic feedback is a very important part of this neuromuscular re-education. That feedback is usually given via a mirror. So patient is asked to exercise in front of the mirror and to try to produce a symmetrical movement. And the focus is given on quality, not the quantity. So that is neuromuscular retraining. Now let us look what are the evidence for this. So evidence is available that when compared with conventional therapy, that is massage, ES, and gross facial expression, when compared with this, neuromuscular re-education proved more effective in a non-blinded randomized controlled trial. So you can say it is a moderate evidence that neuromuscular re-education is more effective compared to the conventional therapy. We have a moderate evidence of that. Coming to the EMG and biofeedback. Now, keep one thing in mind, that this EMG and mirror biofeedback, it is the vital part of treatment, whether we talk about neuromuscular retraining or whether we talk about the mind therapy. Both this therapy, they include EMG and the mirror biofeedback. Okay, so it is already part of neuromuscular training, which has proved to be effective. But without neuromuscular training also, EMG and mirror biofeedback are proved or are found to be effective, and especially in case of late complication like synkinesis. In case of chronic Bell's palsy, where synkinesis have already developed, in that cases EMG and mirror biofeedback have strong evidence of efficacy. So it is the most effective treatment for synkinesis. When compared with control group, both the type of feedback are found to be effective. So when EMG biofeedback was compared with control group, it is found to be effective. When mirror biofeedback was compared with the control group, that was also effective. Individually, both are effective. But when the two were compared with each other, EMG and mirror biofeedback, when they two were compared to each other, then it was found that both are equally effective. So no one type of biofeedback is more effective than the other. Okay. In an assessor blinded RCT done in 1991, so this was a very good quality RCT done on patients with chronic facial nerve paresis. The results suggest higher efficacy of EMG or mirror biofeedback over control group. However, no significant difference was observed between group receiving mirror biofeedback alone and a group receiving mirror plus EMG biofeedback. Okay, so what we know now is that Both EMG and mirror biofeedback are effective when compared with control group. Both are equally effective. Okay, and if you combine the two, there is no added benefit. So if you give just mirror biofeedback to one group and to the other group, if you give mirror plus EMG biofeedback, it is not going to add, right? Both are equally effective, and if you add the two, there is no additive effect. So, and we have very strong evidence for the use of EMG and mirror biofeedback. Okay, coming to electrical stimulation. Now, there is no clear evidence of effectiveness of electrical stimulation in Bell's palsy. And so, there is no evidence that electrical stimulation causes early recovery, or that it is useful in late Bell's palsy for the treatment of synkinesis. So there is no evidence confirming that. The reason is that the studies that have used electrical stimulation as a treatment, they have all used different types of parameters. The population is also different, made up of different etiologies. There is difference in outcome measure. So one cannot clearly conclude the effectiveness of ES on Bell's palsy. It has not been shown to improve either the rate of recovery or quality of facial function. In the chronic stage, one study reported low-level evidence of limited beneficial changes in facial function following large quantities of electrical stimulation. So this particular study that we are talking about, it applied a sub-threshold level of stimulation. Sub-threshold means below sensory threshold. Okay, it applied this sub-threshold stimulation for long periods of time, and the electrodes were implanted. It was continuous stimulation for weeks. Okay, and that is also a low level of evidence that it has positive effect on facial function, but the strength of evidence, like I said, is very low. So we do not have any evidence showing the effectiveness of electrical stimulation as for now. PNF or Kabad therapy, both are same. So PNF is found to be effective in the treatment of acute Bell's palsy when compared to only pharmacological therapy. So when one group of patient was given PNF and the other group was given only the medication. Okay? One group with PNF and medication, the other only medication, and then the PNF group was found that the PNF is found to be effective in treatment of facial palsy or in recovering the facial functions. But no evidence of efficacy of PNF over conventional treatment or other exercise protocol is established. So we still do not know whether PNF is as effective as conventional therapy, or it is more effective than conventional therapy, or other treatment protocols. Okay, so when PNF is given in addition to medication, it definitely improves the facial function. Now, mind therapy. So what is mind therapy? Mind therapy has following components. First component is patient information about treatment, prognosis, cause and course of the disease. Also, the baseline information is collected at this stage. Videos and photographs are taken of the patient. Then the next stage is self-massage of face and neck. So patient is asked to do self-massage of face and neck, so that patient becomes aware about the areas of tightness and areas of hypomobility. And patient can also gently stretch those areas of hypomobility. Then the third stage is breathing and general relaxation. Okay, so patient is given general relaxation, and then specific exercises to coordinate both facial halves and to decrease the synkinesis. So then specific mind exercises are given, and the amplitude and speed of this exercise are varied. Okay, so different the exercises are given at different amplitude and different speed. Then it is progressed to eye and lip closure exercises. Again, here also the amplitude and speed of movement is varied in variety. Then that is progressed to pronunciation of certain letters and words. So labial consonants, guttural consonants, so different types of consonants and sounds are made to practice. And then lastly, expression exercises. So the patients are taught or the patients are asked to do different expression, and that again the amplitude and the speed of expression exercises vary. Okay, so these are the important components of mind therapy. Now let us look at the evidence. So the evidence say there is strong evidence of effectiveness of mind therapy in long-standing facial palsy, and it has been established by an assessor blinded RCT. So an assessor blinded RCT is the highest quality of RCT, and so the evidence is very strong. Okay, so improvements are seen in grades of House-Brakeman facial nerve grading system, Sunnybrook facial grading system, lip mobility, and the facial disability index. All improvement was observed in all these areas with mind therapy. And effects of mind therapy in acute Bell's palsy need to be investigated. So this particular study, RCT, was done in long-standing facial palsy patient, where the facial palsy was present for more than 1 year. Okay, but what is the need of this mind therapy in acute Bell's palsy? Or if we give mind therapy to acute Bell's palsy patient, can it result into early recovery or not? That we do not. But we have strong evidence that this is useful in case of chronic facial palsy or where the synkinesis has already developed. So we have strong evidence for that. Coming to laser. Okay, so this is the latest one. So laser therapy. And now here also we have strong evidence that low-level laser therapy is found to be effective in promoting the recovery from facial palsy. So laser therapy is compared with conventional exercises where laser is found to be more effective. Laser therapy, low-level laser therapy, was also compared with corticosteroid. One group was given laser, the other was given corticosteroid. There also low-level laser therapy was found to be more effective. Then laser therapy in one study, it has also been compared to stellate ganglion block. So one group of patients was given low-level laser therapy, another was given a stellate ganglion block. And there also low-level laser therapy has been found more effective in recovering the facial function. So there is moderate evidence of effectiveness when low-level laser therapy was added to facial exercise as compared to exercise alone. So it has a very good additive effect if you add this low-level laser therapy to exercise. Now another study, very good double-blinded RCT. So both the patient, the therapist, and the assessor were blinded, and the group allocation was randomized. So a very good quality study, and what it was done to compare the effect of high-intensity laser therapy with that of low-intensity laser therapy. And what they found is that both groups, that is a group who was given low-level laser therapy and the group given high-intensity laser therapy, both the groups improved better than the control group who was not given laser. Okay, when the two groups were compared with each other, so HILT group and LLLT group, when they were compared with each other, there was no significant difference. Okay, but they said that the high intensity laser therapy was slightly more effective than in terms of time. So the patients with HILT recovered faster than with low level laser therapy. Okay, so this is that we have a moderate to strong evidence for the effectiveness of laser in case of Bell's palsy. So let us summarize. In the assessment part, we have discussed House-Brakeman test, which has good inter-rater reliability but a low intra-rater reliability. Sunnybrook facial grading system, which has a good reliability both inter-rater and intra-rater. The E-face assessment system, which is comparatively a newer one, and it is yet under the study and they are refining it, but it has a strong inter-rater and intra-rater reliability. And then we have FDI, facial disability index, which is also reliable. In the management part of facial palsy, we have strong evidence supporting the use of mind therapy, laser therapy, and biofeedback. Okay, we have low to moderate level evidence supporting the neuromuscular retraining or rehabilitation. and we do not have any evidence that support the use of electrical stimulation in case of Bell's palsy. So I hope this information is useful to you, and thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Prashant.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, Prashant.
Thank you so much for enlightening us with the evidence-based practices of Bell's palsy. Usually, the mainstay of treatment and the onus of treating a Bell's palsy patient is on electrical stimulation. But today, you have opened our eyes that electrical stimulation has probably very limited role, just probably in maintenance muscle properties and probably nothing else for the recovery. So that and the assessment very informative for all of us. And thank you so much, ma'am. There are a few questions that has come over a period of time. So I would quickly put those questions.
Hello, can you listen me?
Yes, probably schema between the IG and SF currents application to Bell's palsy patient on the facial muscles. So, is there any evidence that interrupted galvanic or surge kinetic current works better? It should be used or should not be used?
Recently in 2017, there is one very good review article that I've quoted in electrical stimulation part. So that review article, it collected studies on electrical stimulation. Those are studies which have used electrical stimulation as a treatment for facial palsy. Okay, and they looked for randomized control trials, RCT and quasi-RCTs. So they reviewed approximately 21 articles that have used electrical stimulation as a treatment, and they found that only 5 RCTs are there. So only 5 studies they could include in their review. So what does this mean? Is that there is very small amount of good research work done in this field, electrical stimulation. Now, if I talk about those 5 articles that they included in their review, 3 said that yes, ES is effective. 2 did not support the use of ES. Now, out of these 3 that supported ES, one article was one article or one research was of that sub-threshold electrical stimulation, which was given for continuously. It was given to the patient with electrodes implanted on the patient facial nerve. Okay, so we can exclude that. It is not IG or SF. We can simply exclude that article. So the remaining 4 articles, 2 said that it is effective, 2 said it is not effective, right? All these 4 articles, they had used IG current. They have not specified IG current, but if we look at the pulse duration and the frequency, we can say that they have used IG currents. Okay, so now the 2 that are supporting the the use of electrical stimulation, one article was published in 1987. Okay, so it is a very old article. In that article, what they have done, they have not compared ES with anything else. They have used a group of patient. That single group of patient was given conventional treatment for 6 months and 6 weeks, and then the same group patients were given electrical stimulation for another 6 weeks, and so on. Okay, so if they get improvement, we cannot say that it was because of the conventional treatment or it was because of the electrical stimulation. So that is the reason that I say that we do not have any evidence for the use of electrical stimulation. We do not have any good quality research to support the use of electrical stimulation. But in the same review, they have also mentioned that electrical stimulation do not cause any harm. It is safe to give. Okay, so it is safe to give, but we do not have any supporting evidence.
So it can be an adjunct to other therapy or the evidence-based protocols, which you already discussed, but it is not the mainstay of the treatment, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Another question that comes in mind is just about the synkinesis of the muscles when the facial nerve gets repaired on its own. So, can you please enlighten us about the synkinesis?
See, synkinesis is basically the aberrant innervation. So when the the axons of facial nerve are sprouting, they lose their track, and the wrong muscles get connected on one side of face, and that results into the synkinesis. Okay, so what happens is when patient attempts any movement, say eye closing the eye or smiling, the entire face moves together. Okay, so that is synkinesis, and it is a very common complication of facial palsy. But the good news is that we have very strong evidence that mind therapy and neuromuscular retraining along with biofeedback, it has a very strong evidence that it can be used to for the treatment of synkinesis, and they have proved very effective.
Okay, so one more question I had in my mind that if these muscles are very small, do we use the needle EMG or we use the surface EMG for the biofeedback treatment?
I think for EMG biofeedback, the article which I have, they've used surface EMG.
Surface EMGs, okay,
Yes.
so that the small muscles don't get injured.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, okay, ma'am. Okay, so we have many more questions which are coming into the comments, and probably we'll have these answers from you as well. As in now, thank you so much, ma'am, on behalf of GGPA, and it has always been great to be a student, and thank you for sparing your precious time with us.
It has always been my pleasure, Prashant. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Happy World Physio Day.
Same to you.